"Miracles for a do," said the poor little black girl. The millionaire laughed until a real miracle happened. The sun beat down on the cracked pavement, and the noise of the city rolled in like an endless wave. Horns honked, hurried footsteps, conversations floated in the air. In the middle of it all was a small, uneven, worn wooden stand painted with shaky letters. "Miracles for a do," sat a girl no more than 8 years old. Her pastel dress, once white with soft-colored stripes, had been washed so many times that the fabric was already thin. Her braids were simple but neat, held with small hairbands. Her hands rested on the counter, small fingers interlaced, while her dark eyes watched the people hurrying by. Most didn't look at her. Some smiled mockingly, whispering that it was a scam. Others laughed openly, shaking their heads at the absurdity of a child claiming to sell miracles for a do. But he was unfazed. He sat silently with his back straight, as if waiting for someone. And that someone arrived in the form of a man in a wheelchair. His suit was expensive, gray, and perfectly tailored. His black shoes shone. His thick, gaudy gold watch flashed as he pushed the wheels forward. He stopped in front of the stall and leaned back with a mocking smile. His voice was high-pitched, loud enough for everyone around him to hear. "Miracles for $1, he mocked, his laughter echoing. "What kind of nonsense is this?" The girl looked at him but said nothing. The man wasn't finished. He smiled wider, enjoying the attention of the small crowd that was beginning to gather. "I'll tell you what," he said sarcastically. "If you can cure me, if you can get me up and walking again, I'll give you $1 million. Those present chuckled, some shaking their heads. They found it cruel but entertaining. A rich man making fun of a poor girl. What could he possibly do? Her. The girl didn't smile, didn't lower her head, just looked at him. Her gaze was steady, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "A miracle isn't always what you think it is, sir." Something in her tone cut through the laughter of the others. It wasn't a game or a childish whim. It was quiet, but it had weight. The kind of weight that compels you to listen even when you don't want to. The man raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think a miracle is? A trick, a prayer? $1's hope?" His voice was mocking, but a spark of discomfort ran through him as he noticed the girl's calm. She wasn't embarrassed or intimidated, she didn't even blink. The girl slowly reached under the stand. The crowd leaned forward, waiting to see what she would pull out. Toy, a child's trick. Instead, she placed a single folded piece of paper on the counter. It was worn, its edges frayed. With her small hands, she slid it toward him. He frowned and took it. The paper trembled slightly in his hand as he opened it. Inside were words written in clumsy letters, sunken into the sheet. "Please God, give me back my mom. She got sick and left. I'll do anything. Just let her hold me one more time." The man's smile faded. His laughter died. The noise of the crowd seemed to dissipate. He looked at the paper and for a moment forgot himself. His throat tightened, a weight pressing on his chest. He looked back at the girl. She was watching him, her face calm but her eyes bright. "That was my first miracle," he said quietly. "But God didn't respond, so I started giving them to others. Maybe he'll listen if I don't stop asking." The man blinked hard. 4 years, he'd carried his own resentment, the pain of being trapped in a chair while the world moved on. He'd drowned it in money, in arrogance, in mocking those who still had hope. But here was a girl with nothing. No mother, no wealth, no reason to believe, and yet she kept asking for miracles. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, ashamed of having laughed earlier. The man tried to hold on to his pride, but something inside him snapped. He clutched the letter, his knuckles white with tension, and for the first time in years, his eyes burned with tears he couldn't hold back. The girl then whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "Sometimes, Lord, the miracle isn't walking. Sometimes it's rising up inside." The letter trembled in his hand. He wanted to laugh again, to dismiss it as a child's scribblings, but he couldn't. Those words had sunk deep, opening wounds he thought had healed long ago. His chest was tight, his throat raspy, and though he tried to control his breathing, something inside him refused to be silenced. The girl remained silent, her small hands clasped on the counter. She didn't pressure him, didn't demand anything. She simply let the silence weigh between them, as if she already knew he was struggling with a battle he'd hidden for years. Finally, the man's voice broke, shaky. "Do you think this is a miracle, a letter, a prayer?" No one answered. His eyes shone as he looked at her, as if he was desperate for her to tell him it was all nonsense so he could retreat back into his armor of pride. The girl bowed her head slightly. "I think the miracle is that I'm still here," she said softly. "That even when I lost my mother, I didn't stop asking, I didn't stop believing. If I give up, I have nothing left. But if I keep going, maybe someone else will receive the miracle I didn't." Her words pierced him like glass. He thought, in her own story, how she used to run, how she danced, how she lived without limits, until the accident took it all away from her. Since then, she hadn't prayed, hadn't had hope. She'd convinced herself that it was easier to mock than to believe, easier to despise the weak than to admit her own despair. And here was a girl who had only lost and yet held a hope strong enough to share with strangers. She looked down at her hands gripping the back of her chair. Her knuckles were white, her breathing labored. For the first time in years, tears streamed down her face. They weren't tears of anger or pity. They were tears of pain, raw and unbridled. She wept for the man he had been. She wept for the arrogance that had chained him more than his own legs. And she wept because a little girl had reminded her that being broken didn't mean the end. The girl's expression didn't change. She didn't boast, she didn't smile victorious, she just watched him. Her large brown eyes were fixed and sad, as if he'd seen them many times before. She slowly pushed a small jar across the counter toward him. Inside were a few crumpled bills and coins, the miracles strangers had paid for. "You don't owe me $1,000,000, he whispered. "Just $1." His hands trembled as he pulled out his wallet. For a man who had spent millions without a thought, taking out a single bill had never felt so heavy. He placed it in the jar, his fingers shaking, his tears falling onto the counter. When he looked at her again, something inside him had changed. His pride was gone. His arrogance shattered. What remained was raw, fragile, and strangely free. "I don't know if I'll ever walk again," he said, his voice cracking. "But today you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." The girl blinked. "What hope?" he whispered. The crowd around them had fallen absolutely silent. Some were weeping quietly. Others were holding their children tighter. A sudden silence fell on that noisy city street, as if everyone was afraid of breaking the fragile gravity of what had just happened. The man slowly backed away in his chair. His hands felt strangely light on the hoops. His legs remained motionless. But inside, for the first time in years, he felt as if he had stood up, not physically, but in the way that truly matters. He took one last look at the girl. "You said miracles aren't always what we believe," he murmured. "Maybe you're right. Maybe the miracle is simply remembering to believe again." The girl nodded, her face unchanging but her eyes shining. He promised her nothing more. He offered her no false hope. There simply stood a little girl behind a wooden stand, continuing her silent struggle to keep asking for miracles in a world that had given her every reason to stop. And as the man rolled away, wiping his face with the back of his hand, he was carrying with him something that no doctor, no money, no success had been able to give him. Not a cure for your legs, but a cure for your soul. The crowd began to disperse. Some dropped money into the jar, others gently touched the girl's shoulder as they passed, but she remained motionless, her hands clasped again, waiting for the next person who might arrive. Not for tricks, not for games, but for the kind of miracle that only a broken child who refused to stop believing could deliver. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it and subscribe for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. And tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing from all of you. Until next time, be kind, stay curious, and keep watching.